Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi-Cantor, Malachi Kanfer.
So about 15 years ago or 16 years ago, I was coming back from my second year studying in Israel. And one of the exciting things about coming back from that year, I was at Stuttering in Israel. One of the exciting things about coming back to JTS is that you get to meet all kinds of new people who are part of the new classes. And I was in both cantorial and rabbinical schools, so there were new faces to meet. And one of those new faces was this guy, Malachi, who was in cantorial school just a few semesters behind me. And here are some things that I think that you should know about Malachi. He once upon a time had the best dog I've ever met in my whole life. And like whenever he teaches in honor and in memory of his dog, including when he was recently ordained by Ziegler. So he is a fellow rabbi and cantor. That's another thing you should know about him. Another thing that you should know about him is that he is the community spiritual leader at Kehilat Ma'arav. So if you like what he teaches today, you don't have to tell me, but you can, occasionally not come to Beth and you can go visit him. Another is that I don't know if we'll hear him sing today, but if you don't get a chance to, you should get an opportunity to. And one upcoming opportunity to do so is that Malachi and his community are joining us for the evening of Slichot. I think it's September 5th. Did I get that correct? I think so. September 5th, we're at Sinai Temple. Our community choirs are all going to be singing, and Malachi and I will have the pleasure of getting to draw you all into the new year together. He is a man of great humility who's going to teach us about another man of great humility. And without further ado, Malachi, we're excited to learn from you today. Rabbi-Cantor, Bakasha.
Hi, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom. It's really my honor to be here, and I am really grateful for the invitation to learn a small amount with all of you. So just a bit first about what I'm going to teach and a bit about me. So I'm a person who has a stutter. I stutter. I've stuttered since age 6. And for people who stutter, there are ups and downs. And there are periods of life where you can be pretty fluent. And there have also been periods of my life where I've been almost unable to talk at all. I was for example, I had a lead role in a play in high school, and I talked maybe twice in classes in college. And if I had to give a presentation, I did it with my guitar and I sang it because I was having a hard time talking in that time of my life. Stuttering is a multifactorial condition. So there's something that's happening neurologically in my brain, but there's also an element that's just habit that is built up over time of having a stutter. There's also a strong emotional element to it, so it's affected by, I would say, confidence and feelings of shame and self-esteem. And there are also parts of it that just seem like a mystery, and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not, and you have to live with the results even if it's Rosh Hashanah and I'm the rabbi at a synagogue and I'm giving the sermon, and sometimes it's just going to come anyway, right? All of that to say that I've always been interested by, in particular, this aspect of Moshe and the Torah, and he seems to have a speech impediment of some kind. I know that usually at this time on Shabbat, we would learn a bit about the Parsha upcoming for next week and have a teaching that's based on that. And my excuse is just that, Moshe is talking this entire book, and maybe he's talking with a stutter. I don't know. But it's a bad excuse, perhaps. But in any case, often when I chant through text, or when I'm teaching a text, I'll chant the Hebrew and I will translate as I go, and then we'll learn a text as we always do. We'll ask questions and we will work our way through and try to come to a thesis or a counter thesis and maybe a point that we can take home and be done by 8:10 or earlier. Okay, so the first instance here, right? So we're in Exodus 4, and Moshe is at the burning bush, and this is the 5th time he's tried to plead with God that he says, I'm not the person to take on this role. I'm not the person to be sent to the Pharaoh to let the Israelites out. And he says, Biado Shem lo ish tevarim anochi. So I am not a man of words. Gam mitmo, gam mishilshom. I wasn't yesterday or even the day beforehand. Beforehand, gam me'azdaberecha el avdecha, and I haven't been this person of words since I talked to you for the first time. Ki chavad peh uchavad lashon anochi, because I'm a person of heavy mouth and a heavy tongue. I am. Vayomar Hashem elav, and God said to him, Mi sampeh ladam, who put a mouth into humans? Omi yasum elim, and who made a person mute? O cheresh, or unable to hear? O pikeach, or able to see? O iver, or blind? Hello, Anochi Adonai. Hello, Anochi Hashem. Is it not me, God? So we have this whole issue of what does a heavy mouth and a heavy tongue mean? And I don't know if that question is so interesting, but we'll get into that. Also interesting here is what is God asking? What is God trying to accomplish in the conversation with Moshe? When he says, are I not the creator of everything? In response to Moshe saying, I'm this person of heavy mouth and heavy tongue. His last resort of trying to get out of this task that he's being sent on. Right. So you're saying that God is using rationality, saying like, "Hey, I created everything. It doesn't matter." Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah. I mean, I think the idea is that God is saying, "Do you not think that I have a plan? Do you not think that you're not part of a master plan?" I think of this when we say the Shema Yisrael. And when we say Hashem Echad, obviously there are lots and lots of ways to think about it. And is it multiple gods? And I've come to think about it in the last couple of years as when we say that God is one, we say that we are part of a larger oneness. We're part of we're like a note in a symphony, a brush of paint in an artwork, and we're not always able to see the symphony or the artwork. We're definitely not able to see the larger picture, but being a person of faith means having trust that life has meaning and purpose, and therefore there is a larger piece. Not to say that everything happens for a reason, not to say that that all challenges and hardships in our life happen for a reason. Because they don't, but that we are part of a larger plan, and I think that's what God is saying to Moshe. Okay, great. So this next instance here, where Moshe talks about potentially his inability to talk, happens a couple chapters afterwards. So this is after Moshe goes to talk to Paro for the first time, and of course it does not go well, right? And the Pharaoh increases the labor of the Israelites, and the foremen of the Israelites are really, really angry at him. And I'm just going to chant from verse 12. Vaydaber Moshe lifnei Hashem lemor, hein bnei Yisrael lo shamu elai, ve'ech yishma'eni Pharaoh. How will the Pharaoh hear me? Vani aros sifatayim, because I'm a person with lips that are uncircumcised. And I think this idea that his lips have a covering over them of some kind, it's much more strong than saying that his lips and his tongue are heavy. It's stronger. It's an inability to speak. And I think it makes sense that he would use that kind of expression here. Because it's happened after, I think, the worst nightmare for someone with an impediment in their speech, right? Like in high school, I had this fear that, like, let's say I became a doctor or something, and I would be talking to a nurse, and we were working on a patient, and I would have to tell the nurse, okay, we need X amount of this kind of medication, and I wouldn't be able to get the words out of my mouth, and the patient would die in the moment, right? Because I have a stutter, and my block would cause horrible things to happen. And I don't know if Moshe in that conversation with Paro, if he had blocks in his speech, but I would imagine that he would. And yeah, and then you can feel like you don't want to talk at all, ever. Mm-hmm.
Because Moshe is saying essentially that the Israelites are not listening to me. In other words, I'm coming in to plead their cause, but I don't represent them because they're not listening to us. So how the hell is Pharaoh not listening? And then what he's essentially wishing, maybe I could be more persuasive if my tongue were looser. But the most important part of that is that if I can't convince them whom I'm representing, then how the hell can I convince him who doesn't want to deal with them?
True. Yeah, and I can relate it back to 100%. I think bringing it back to the talking issue in another way, then you could say, oh my gosh, if I can't talk to the people in my family, in my tribe, how could I possibly go and talk to the Pharaoh too? And yeah. Okay, so then we have some analysis, some rabbinical analysis on what of commentators on what actually this heavy mouth, heavy tongue thing is. Rashi is very clear. He just says it's a balbus, which is French for a stutter. Rashbam, his grandson, has another idea. Can I have a volunteer to read the English on the Rashbam? It starts on the bottom of page 1. I can bring over a microphone.
Rashbam in Exodus 4:10, slow of speech and slow of tongue. I am not expert in the Egyptian language, in the precision of expression, for I fled from there in my youth, and I am now 80 years old. And is it possible that a prophet whom Hashem had known face to face, and who had received the Torah from his hand to his own hand, would stutter in his language? And there is no such statement in the words of the Tanaim or the Amoraim, and we need not pay attention to outside literature.
All right. So you read this, and I think it's a little rough. Rashbam is saying something which I think is echoed by Maimonides and others by Maimonides, where there's this idea that a prophet, that Maimonides wants a prophet to be whole. He wants they shouldn't have a disability. We see this in the halachot of people who are supposed to lead tefillah or read in the Torah. There are some handicaps that you don't want for particular roles that traditional halakha says will interfere with particular roles, and they're hard to read, and it makes sense, and I think it makes sense in this context. But yeah. Okay. So I want to actually skip this paragraph in the middle of page 2, and then we're going down to the Ran. The Ran is a leading halachic authority. He has a commentary on the Rif. But here he is talking about prophecy. Can I have another volunteer to read this? Thanks, Joe. Oh, yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that a prophet must possess all of the perfections which gain him esteem in the eyes of the populace, so that they will more readily heed his words, and he will more readily secure for them the betterment for which purpose he was sent. And for this reason Moshe was invested with all the perfections of the prophet to make manifest the divinity of his calling, and divested with deliberate intent of lucid speech, so that not be thought that it was his eloquence which made Israel and its leaders his followers. For men with glib tongues have been known to attract multitudes and to have their lies taken for truth. The very opposite, however, is the case with one whose speech is impaired. Even the truth he speaks will not be accepted unless it is absolutely transparent.
So can someone put in their own words the argument that he's making here?
He's basically saying that doesn't matter, and I think it's true, because what Moses' power was not in his speech; it was God giving the plagues that made it was lower. It was God giving the plagues that made the people, Pharaoh, change his mind. You know, he could have been a mute. You know, he just was. You know what I mean? It's basically saying it doesn't matter.
I would counter that by saying, how about Moses' role in the leadership of the Israelites in the desert, and in his speech the book of the Torah, where over and over again he's telling the Israelites how to behave in the land of Israel and the consequences if they don't, and the blessings that they will receive if they do behave, right? He gives this long speech, which is beautiful. It kind of has an effect for a while in the book of Joshua, before we go later on in the prophets, but he seems to be effective in some ways anyway. So I don't know, anyone else have any ideas? Well, here's what I would say. I would say that it is true, in some ways I think it is true in my experience, because when I am very clear, when I am very clear in my own head about the point which I'm making, usually I am much more fluent. We had a teacher in school, Rabbi Ed Feinstein, who says that when you give a sermon, you need to make sure you have a thesis that's very clear. You can have a counter thesis if you want. You need to know all the Torah, which you're going to use to back up the thesis or the counter thesis, and you need to have a turn at some point to, like, here's how this should impact your own life. It's one way to write a thesis, but to write a sermon, but what it's very helpful in is saying, here's my point, here's the takeaway point. And when something is clear and authentic and true, it tends to flow out of you. Whether you're fluent, whether you're not fluent, people will hear it. And I think because of my stutter, I am forced to try to be as clear as possible in my sermons. Because otherwise, if I tried to fake it and toss in lots of extraneous text and think, I wouldn't be able to talk. I also think there's truth in saying if something is true, it's going to come out regardless of the charm of the speaker, regardless of anything else. It will be heard. At least we hope so. Yeah?
There are certain parsha. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Keep on going.
There are certain parshiot which are subject to a multitude of interpretations depending on the person who's reading it and how they're reading it and bringing themselves to it and getting something, their message out of it. This one happens to be one of those. And so different people are going to come away with different ideas of what's really going on here. That's part of the beauty of Torah. It's like you need everybody to read it, to study it, to live it as part of that whole process. This is what Jews do. It's a process.
Totally, and I do think it is beautiful to hold all of these interpretations and to figure out if we're going to hold multiple truths at once, if we're going to pick one side or not. That is what we do. There isn't a lot of time, so I'm going to briefly read through or chant through. So I'm now in the middle of page 3. This is Julia Watts Belser, who is a professor of Jewish studies at Georgetown. She's also a leader in Jewish disability studies, and she also is someone who uses a wheelchair. Am I going to read this or chant it? Occasionally, when I give a sermon at my job, I chant it. And it makes my life a little bit easier, but I think I'll just read it. Okay. There's something about the story that gets under my skin. The story that she's talking about is the midrash of the origin of Moses' impediment in his speech, right? If you remember the midrash from Exodus Rabbah, the story is that Moshe is a baby in the palace, and he's loved by everyone in the Pharaoh, and he tries on the crown of Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh's advisors get really nervous about it, and they say to the Pharaoh, this person's going to take your throne, this person's going to take your crown, and they want to have him killed. And then for this odd reason, Yitro, his future father-in-law, is in the palace, and he says, why don't we do this test instead, right? And they have 2 bowls. There's one bowl that has coal in it, a hot burning coal, and one with gold. And the baby Moshe is about to reach towards the gold, which would lead to his death. And he reaches, and the angel Gabriel, I think, comes and pushes his arm towards the coal. Right? And then he puts the coal, it's really hot, he puts the coal into his mouth and the tongue burns. Okay, there's something about the story, that midrash, that gets under my skin. It suggests that speech disability comes about because of divine intervention, a direct consequence of his God-given mission. It perpetuates one of the most pervasive assumptions I encounter in religious space, that disability needs a God-given reason for being. I don't believe that anyone should be in the business of applying these kinds of stories to another person's life. So this is the idea. We can be disabled, we can have our issues, it can be anything, right? It doesn't have to be because of a larger story of redemption, of healing, or trying to create a purpose. We're allowed to just be. Fine. But she keeps on going at another point in her book. And I guess there isn't really time to read all this out loud. Oh, my goodness. No, I'm not going to. No, I'm not going to do it. But the point is that then she says, but also it's great if we can find meaning, right? Which we all think is true. If we can turn the hardships that we have in our lives into strengths, if we can take pain that we've had in our lives and turn it into meaning, that's a really wonderful thing to do. If we have to mourn, it's a healthy thing to do with all kinds of challenges in our life, and we can do that with disabilities too, if we choose to. She also goes on to say that perhaps, and she's not the only person who has said this, that perhaps when we read the words of Moshe in the Torah, we could, as we read the words, we could do it with hesitations and blocks in our speech, which I don't think I would do. But it's an interesting idea. The last thing, I'm just going to read from the last. This is narcissistic, I think. I'm going to read from the last page of my essay for rabbinical school when I applied to Ziegler. I had been working as a cantor in Midtown Manhattan. The rabbi had went on a sabbatical. I gave a bunch of the sermons, and there were lots of deaths, and I liked being in that teaching role and in a leadership role, which is why I decided. A part of the reason why I decided to go to rabbinical school. So it's a teaching by the Nitziv, and in Exodus 3:18, God seems to reassure Moses that the Israelite elders will listen to him, and he says that the elders will listen to your voice. However, the Nitziv, in his commentary here, he makes the phrase conditional. Only if you speak with your own voice, will the elders listen and join you in challenging Pharaoh. And Aviva Zornberg writes that the whole scenario of redemption depends on this one condition: Moses' voice must be heard. I obviously do not believe that I am personally responsible for redemption of the world, but I do believe that everyone is responsible for the redemption of the world in our own way. And I believe that everyone's voice is important to make that everyone's true self and everyone's ability to live their true purpose in the world is essential for making that redemption happen. I gave a Dvar Torah at a dating event for young people this last weekend, and I told them a story about it's a Hasidic story, and I forget the name of the rabbi, but Rabbi Rosenberg is about to die, and his students come up to him, and he's afraid, and he's shaking, and he's in pain, and his students come up to him, and they say, "Rabbi, how come you're afraid? It's okay. You were as wise as Abraham. You were almost as wise as Abraham. All will go well for you in heaven." And another one comes up to him and says, "Rabbi, it's okay. You were as wise as Moshe." Another one comes up to him and says, "You were as kind as Abraham." And he's still afraid and shaking. And when he tells them, he says, "You don't understand. I'm afraid that when I go up, I'm afraid that they'll say, 'Why weren't you more like Rabbi Rosenberg? Why weren't you the best Rosenberg that you could be? Not as wise as Moses or as kind as Avraham?'" I think we're all trying. Who's the name of that rabbi? Zusha. Rabbi Zusha. Thank you. Rabbi Zusha. So I am trying to live my purpose in the world by being a rabbi with a stutter. And when I teach this kind of thing, my only hope is to inspire other people to try to live their purpose in the world.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.